Hey there, beautiful souls, and welcome back to the podcast. Whether you've been with us since the first episode or you're just tuning in now, I'm so grateful to have you here. Today we're going to dive deep into the ancient wisdom of the philosophers, the original truth seekers, and explore how their teachings connect to the universal laws that shape our lives. You'll be amazed at how much their insights still resonate with us today and influence the way we live, think, and grow. So get comfy. Open your heart and let's journey together into the wisdom of the ages. Let's rewind for a moment, way back to ancient Greece, where a group of brilliant thinkers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle were asking some of life's biggest questions. They weren't just pondering random ideas, they were trying to figure out the fundamental truths of existence. Questions like, what is truth? How do we know right from wrong? And how can we live a truly good life? These philosophers believed that universal truths shaped how we live and interact with the world. Fast forward to today, and those same truths still ripple through concepts like law of attraction, which suggests that the energy we put out into the world directly impacts what we receive in return. Whether we realize it or not, these universal laws are constantly at play in our everyday lives. Let's dive into Socrates' world for a bit. Socrates wasn't interested in giving people answers, he was more about asking the right questions, a technique we now call the Socratic method. He believed truth wasn't something you could be handed on a silver platter. Instead, it had to be uncovered by deeply questioning and reflecting on everything around us, especially ourselves. Think about that in terms of law of attraction. If we're not in tune with our true desires or motivations, how can we expect to manifest them in our lives? Socrates was saying that knowing yourself, understanding your thoughts, intentions, and beliefs is the first step to aligning your inner world with the outer one. Sounds familiar, right? Let me give you a modern example. Imagine someone constantly thinks, I'm going to fail, I'm not good enough. According to the law of attraction, those negative thoughts will only attract more negative outcomes. But using a Socratic approach, if that person starts asking, why do I think I'll fail? Is this actually true? Then they begin to shift their mindset. This opens the door to more positive energy and ultimately better results. Socrates famously said, the unexamined life is not worth living. What does that mean for us today? Essentially, if we don't take the time to reflect on our choices, beliefs, and actions, we're missing out on the deeper understanding of life. The law of attraction echoes that sentiment, reminding us that if we don't examine the energy we're sending out into the world, we're unlikely to manifest our best lives. Socrates' idea of questioning everything, especially ourselves, fits perfectly into what we've been exploring about universal laws. Both philosophies encourage us to be conscious of our intentions and aware of the energy that we create. A big part of Socrates' philosophy was his understanding that wisdom begins with acknowledging our ignorance. He knew he didn't know everything, and that's what made him wise. It wasn't about having all the answers, but being open to constantly learning, questioning, and evolving. This openness mirrors how we engage with universal laws. We're always learning, adjusting, and aligning our thoughts to better match the energy we want to attract. The journey towards wisdom, much like the journey towards manifesting our desires, is never really finished. We're always growing. Socrates stayed true to his search for truth even in the face of death. He didn't compromise his values, and though his life ended tragically, his legacy continued through his students like Plato and shaped much of Western philosophy. Today, we might not face life or death trials like Socrates, but the need for self-examination and seeking truth remains crucial. Whether through meditation, journaling, or just taking the time to reflect, aligning our thoughts and actions with our higher purpose is essential for living a meaningful life. Socrates' famous words, that the unexamined life isn't worth living, still resonates today. They serve as a reminder that finding truth, whether through philosophy or by working with universal laws, requires reflection, humility, and a commitment to self-awareness. It's not always easy, but the journey toward deeper understanding is always worth it. Moving from Socrates' emphasis on self-examination and personal truth, we now come to his student Plato. Plato took Socrates' teachings and expanded on them, developing his famous theory of forms. The idea is that everything in our physical world is just a shadow, a reflection of a higher, perfect reality. Plato believed that true truth exists in these higher ideal forms, and what we experience here on Earth is just an imperfect version of that truth. This idea hits home when we think about the law of attraction. Plato's theory says the real, ideal form of anything, whether it's love, success, or happiness, exists beyond the physical world. Similarly, the law of attraction teaches that our invisible thoughts and energy shape the reality we experience. So even though we don't physically see the energy we put out, it's always working behind the scenes, creating our physical world. Let's say you're trying to manifest a healthy, happy life. Plato would say that the ideal version of that life already exists in a higher reality. It's out there waiting for you to align yourself with it. The law of attraction tells us the same thing. By aligning our thoughts, energy, and actions with what you want, you bring that ideal reality into existence. Know your worth, because that's the key to tapping into your ideal form. Plato gives us a powerful metaphor to understand this in The Republic, the allegory of the cave. It's one of the most famous metaphors in philosophy and speaks to the journey toward enlightenment and truth. In the allegory, there are prisoners chained in a dark cave, their entire reality based on shadows projected on a wall. These shadows represent a limited, distorted version of reality. Since the prisoners have never seen anything else, they believe these shadows are all there is. Imagine that. Their whole worldview is just a reflection, a dim version of the truth. Then one day, one of the prisoners is freed. I like to think of it as some kind of divine intervention, or maybe someone shared a bit of higher knowledge. At first, the light blinds him. He's confused because he's only ever known darkness and shadows. But as he adjusts, he starts to see the world as it really is. He sees the sun, the trees, and the true forms of things. And in that moment, he realizes that everything he thought he knew was just a shadow of the real world. This is a part that I love because it symbolizes enlightenment, stepping out of the shadows of limited understanding and into the truth. The freed prisoner now knows that the real world is far more vivid and beautiful than the shadows in the cave. That's what happens when we experience a spiritual awakening or an aha moment. Everything we thought we knew expands into something deeper and truer. But here's where it gets even more profound. The freed prisoner doesn't just stay outside, basking in his newfound truth. No, he goes back into the cave to help the others, to show them there's a whole new world beyond the shadows. But instead of being grateful, the other prisoners mock him. They refuse to believe that anything else exists, and they cling to a reality they've always known. Plato suggests that they might even become hostile towards anyone who tries to challenge their perception. So what does this all mean? Plato is showing us that the journey towards truth and enlightenment is often uncomfortable, even painful. When we step outside of our limited perceptions, whether it's about life, the universe, or ourselves, it's not always easy to process. The light of truth can be blinding at first, and when we try to share our discoveries with others, they may resist or reject us because it challenges everything that they've ever known. But here's the thing, that doesn't make the truth any less real. So for all you lighthouses out there, keep shining your light. Even if some people are still stuck in the cave, they'll find their way when they're ready. This is just like when we start to wake up spiritually. You begin to see the world in a whole new light, understanding that there's so much more to reality than what we can physically see. And just like the freed prisoner, you feel this urge to share that understanding with others, but not everyone is ready to see it. Some people are still chained to their old ways of thinking, clinging to the shadows. It's tough, but it's part of the process. It's actually freeing knowing that everything we experience is shaped by our thoughts and beliefs. I've come to realize that my reality is what it is because at some point I chose to experience it that way. And the beauty is, at any moment I can make a different choice. No guilt, no shame, just growth. Because if I'm not 100% for myself, how can I be 100% for anyone else? This is where Plato's allegory ties so beautifully into universal law, especially the law of attraction. The reality we see is often just a reflection of our inner world. Much like the shadows on the cave wall, when we focus on positive energy, we begin to attract that positivity into our lives. But before we can fully manifest the life we desire, we have to step outside our old ways of thinking. We have to let go of the shadows we've been holding on to and embrace the higher truths and about how the universe works. So I want you to ask yourself, are there shadows in your life that you might be clinging to? What truths are waiting for you outside the cave? Next up is Aristotle, Plato's student, who had a slightly different take on things. While Plato focused on higher realities and the theory of forms, Aristotle looked more at the natural world. He believed that everything had a purpose, and that understanding the cause behind something helps us predict its outcome. This lines up perfectly with the law of cause and effect, which says that everything we do has a consequence, whether we see it immediately or not. For Aristotle, virtues like courage and justice weren't just ideals. They were things we develop through practice. It's kind of like building habits to manifest the life we want. By living in tune with nature's laws and working on these virtues daily, Aristotle believed that we could live what he called the good life. Think about it this way. Let's say you're working on building a successful business. Aristotle would say to study the cause and effect of your actions. What steps lead to success? What habits or virtues do you need to practice? Similarly, the law of attraction tells us that focusing on the right energy, thoughts, and actions will help you create the outcomes you desire. You might start by visualizing that success, aligning your energy with that vision, and then taking practical steps to make it happen. Aristotle digs deeper into these ideas in his Nicomachean Ethics, where he talks about how living virtuously leads to what he calls eudaimonia, often translated as flourishing or the good life. For Aristotle, all human actions aim at some good, but the highest good, the ultimate purpose of life, is achieving this state of flourishing. Now let's talk about what eudaimonia really means. It's not just about happiness in the way we think of it today. It's about living a life of reason, virtue, and purpose. Aristotle believed that happiness isn't something we passively experience. It's something we actively achieve by living in alignment with our highest potential. So how do we reach eudaimonia? According to Aristotle, the key is living virtuously. And virtue for him is all about balance, finding the means between two extremes. Take courage, for example. It's a virtue, but it lies between the extremes of recklessness and cowardice. In every situation, there's a virtuous response, and the goal is to find that balance in all areas of life. Here's where Aristotle's philosophy still rings true today. We can think of eudaimonia as living authentically and in alignment with our higher purpose. For Aristotle, flourishing wasn't about short-term happiness. It was all about making conscious choices to develop virtues like courage, justice, and temperance in our everyday lives. For example, Aristotle talks about justice as both a character trait and a way of acting. It's not just about being fair to others. It's about cultivating a just mindset. When we live virtuously, we're not just improving our own lives, we're contributing to the greater good of society. And that's the kind of life that leads to lasting fulfillment. One of Aristotle's biggest ideas is that virtue isn't something we're born with. It's something we develop through practice. He tells us that we become virtuous by doing virtuous actions. So if you want to become more courageous or generous, you need to practice courage and generosity regularly. Over time, these actions become second nature. It's like building a muscle, creating a habit. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. This idea fits perfectly with how we think about personal growth today. It's about consistency. If you want to live in alignment with your higher purpose, you need to practice that alignment every day. Aristotle's real message is that happiness and fulfillment come from living a life of virtue. When we align our actions with our values and we consistently strive for balance, we're able to flourish. And here's something I find really interesting. Aristotle believed that true flourishing is something we can only assess at the end of our lives. That's not about one moment of success. It's the result of a lifetime of virtuous living. This resonates with modern ideas about personal growth, authenticity, and finding purpose. We talk a lot about living your truth or achieving personal excellence, but really, we're echoing what Aristotle said all these years ago. So how do we apply Aristotle's wisdom in our lives? It's actually pretty straightforward. Focus on cultivating virtues through your everyday actions, whether it's choosing courage over fear, moderation over indulgence, or justice over self-interest. These decisions shape our character over time. And by living this way, we don't just improve ourselves. We help the people and communities around us flourish too. And that's something we desperately need right now, isn't it? Flourishing communities, especially with what's happening with our government these days. We need strong communities, ones built on values like justice and courage. Because we're all in this together, fighting the same broken system. And if we created it, I believe we can heal it too. Ultimately, Aristotle believed that flourishing comes from living a life aligned with virtue, not from chasing external rewards or fleeting pleasures. It's about finding that balance and practicing virtue as a habit in everything we do. So the next time you're faced with a tough decision, think about how Aristotle would advise you to find the middle ground, the virtuous choice. That will lead to lasting fulfillment and flourishing, both for you and the world around you. Here's an interesting thought. Were Aristotle's laws of nature similar to what we now call the law of attraction? While Aristotle's laws focused on